We'll call to order. Roll call, please.
Veranda, Castroville,
Here.
County of Monterey,
Here is alternate for Glen Church, Wendy Askew.
Delray Oaks,
Here.
Marina Coast,
Here.
Monterey,
Here.
Pacific Grove,
Here.
Salinas,
Here.
Sand City, Seaside. We do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We haven't done this in a while, so I'm going to ask our general manager to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Shudo. We go to additions to the agenda. Are there any from staff? Any from directors?
Through the chair, this is Wendy. I just wanted to announce that I'll be participating via AB 2449 tonight under the just cause for sickness. And I am in a room with another adult. My husband is in and out of the space that I'm in. I'm announcing that as required by the AB 2449 legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Askew. All right, we go to approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
So move.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Williamson. And that was, thank you, Director Stefani. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on approval of the agenda? Chai, do you see any hands? I don't see any
I don't
hands.
see any raised hands.
All right, then roll call, please.
Castroville,
Yes.
County of Monterey,
Aye.
Delray Oaks,
Aye.
Marina Coast,
Yes.
Monterey,
Yes.
Pacific Grove.
Aye.
Salinas. Yes. A motion carries 6 yes and 4 absent.
Thank you very much, Chai. We go to agenda item 6, public comments. Anyone wishing?
3 absent.
We got it. We go to agenda item 6, public comments. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters not appearing on the agenda may do so now for not more than 3 minutes. Comments on any other matter listed on the agenda are welcome at the time the matter is being considered by the board. Anyone from the public have any comments?
I don't see any raised hands from the public.
Thank you very much, Shai. Then we move on to agenda item 7, action items. This is received draft fiscal year 2023 budget proposal. Staff.
Thank you, Chair Moore. So we do have a PowerPoint that we're going to go over. It'll be on your screen. Just wanted to give a brief overview. So thank you for the opportunity to go over this in somewhat, I wouldn't say excruciating detail, but enough detail that I think we'll hit the main topics of the budget. The budget has been prepared over the last 5 months or so to try to meet the needs of the agency as well as be within the existing Prop 218 that was passed 3 years ago. So what you'll see is sort of a tag team amongst some of the staff. I'm going to start off. Fred will jump in on some of the financial specifics and comparables and things like that. And then Tammy's going to talk about our capital project. So capital projects, not singular. If you remember back a few years ago, one of the main reasons for the request to increase rates that are Prop 218 was the need for renewal and replacement of our existing infrastructure. As you well know, utilities are infrastructure intensive. We have somewhere between $500 million to $750 million worth of assets that we all use and own and that we need to maintain. In addition, the increases were also to go into reserves. We did not have enough reserves as compared to other like agencies, as well as just the needs of the agency moving forward. And that backdrop is what is predicated on the development of this budget through the lens of our strategic plan. So with that, can we just throw the PowerPoint up and we can jump into it? So these are, this is the agenda. This is what we're effectively going to go over. And like I said, it'll be myself, Fred, and Tammy with other staff assisting when we have questions. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to meet our strategic goals. Obviously, be in regulatory compliance, maintain the wastewater in the pipe when it needs to be, treat it, and either reuse or effectively dispose it. Fiduciary responsibility is key with everything we do, obviously. The budget that we're about to present is a little over $90 million and supports 265,000 residents in the county. We also want to be a resource to everyone in the county. You know, we work very closely with a number of the entities right here, City of Salinas, Marina Coast, City of Monterey, our partners at Monterey County Water Resources Agency, and others. So it's sort of a diverse viewpoint in terms of our outreach to others, but it's a significant part of what we do. Once again, general stuff, I think many of you know, in terms of the assets that we're trying to manage and utilize, we have a 17 million gallon per day treated wastewater coming into the plant. That treatment plant is 29.6 million gallon per day capacity. So we have some headspace there. It's a big facility, those of you that have been out there. We operate and maintain 42 pump stations. A lot of those are actually other cities' pump stations. We own 10 of them. And then there's 35 miles of pipeline. We're not talking those 6-inch pipelines that are in the road, generally speaking. These are the force mains conveying the wastewater to the treatment plant. You see the little the little picture to the side, and that is our service area, and the blue represents the agricultural lands, those 12,000 acres where the recycled water has been going for 25 years now. Next slide, please. Talking about recycled water, because it's truly, the mission has shifted in the last 50 years from treating the waste and disposing of it to reusing a valuable resource, particularly in this community. The nice little bar chart shows our average production of agricultural water going to those 12,000 acres. And then to the right, 3 years ago, we started off Pure Water Monterey, and that's the number of acre feet per year that is being produced and injected into the, well, one of two places, either into the Seaside Basin or to Marina Coast for irrigation as another customer. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So basically, the budget was designed, kind of like Paul talked about earlier, really to address two of the main key things with the rate increases, you know, to basically address our increased capital needs and to address, you know, the needs for, you know, a higher amount of reserves at the agency. So this slide kind of summarizes basically where the budget is projected to put us at the end of fiscal year 23-24. So we're looking at basically with our budget, that the reserves would be about 40% of operations. Just to put that in perspective, the board adopted basically a policy saying kind of two types of reserves: operating reserves and capital reserves. The operating reserve policy was to be at 50% within 5 years, basically this within 25-26. So we're making good progress towards that goal. Same thing for capital reserves as well too. So the board kind of adopted a two-part policy on the capital reserves to be within 10% of our 10-year plan within a 5-year period, and to be within 20% of our 10-year plan within a 10-year period. So again, we're making good progress on doing that. We're projecting to be about 8% our capital reserves by the end of 23-24. And we've been able to build up our pure water reserves as well too. What helped a lot with that was we received a one-time grant of about $19 million last year that really helped us to build up our capital replacement reserves. So we're projecting to be about 14 million for our pure water. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you just touch on the development of the reserve policy and how it relates to our comparables?
Yeah, so basically what we did, just kind of stepping back a little bit, we compared ourselves versus a lot of comparable agencies, basically wastewater agencies in the area. And pretty much all of them, we'll show that on another slide as well too. But pretty much all of those agencies had operating reserves of at least 50% of their annual operating budget, and had capital reserves, actually most of them well in excess of the 10%. So, and the important thing for us as well too, is we've had to issue a significant amount of debt related to pure water. So for our basically wastewater capital improvements as we go, we're mostly going to have to rely on what you call a pay-as-you-go structure. So the importance of having those reserves to be able to fund those capital improvements is really important. The other addition as well too is, should the board decide in the future for us to go on the tax roll for collecting the fees, it's important to have those reserves to kind of cover, in essence, the dry periods on those as well too. So the budget, Paul mentioned it, is basically about 92 million for next year, of which the wastewater is by far the largest portion at about 59 million. 30% of that total budget, about 28 million, is for capital. And of the capital, about 16 million relates to wastewater. Paul talked about this a little bit. We do have a very aggressive 10-year plan. We're looking at investing about 228 million kind of across a 10-year period. That's a pretty significant amount of capital improvements and other types of capital outlay. Our debt ratings right now, it's kind of a split rating. It's an A+, AA3. We were just reaffirmed earlier this week on the WIFIA bonds that we're also receiving an A+ rating for those bonds as well too. And they're actually our bond consult, or I should say our fiscal advisor, we're going to be working with the rating agencies. We're hoping we can actually raise the wastewater rating to potentially a AA rating next year. We'll have to work with them on that. But they've mentioned that our reserves really have become much stronger than they were in the past few years when we received that A+ rating. So that's the thing we're making.
I just want to pause for a second, because what he just said is this is on the WIFIA loan for the Pure Water Monterey expansion that we just received that A+ rating on a new fund, effectively. So that was really good news. And I know Fred, Mike, and others have worked really hard. Actually, Mike reminded me that we first put the loan application in, the letter of interest, I should say, back in 2019 for this WIFIA loan. So it's been a lot of hard work. But I was just very pleased with that rating from S&P.
And we were very pleased too. We weren't sure if we were going to actually only get like a BBB rating on that, but they basically emphasized the strength of, the strongness of the agreement, the strength of our reserves, and just strong management in general. They complimented on all of those things. Next slide.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah,
on the slide?
absolutely.
Could you describe the ratings and how they work? So we have the A+, you're talking about a AA. What are the different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's 3 different agencies that basically, for the most part, provide ratings. It's S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. So our 2 rating, the A+ rating is basically from S&P. The Moody's is from, the AA3 is from Moody's. So the AA3 is kind of like almost like a AA- in essence. So the way it works on ratings, the highest rating you can get is a AAA rating. And basically the way it works is the higher the rating you get, when you go to issue bonds, you're going to have lower interest costs because they consider you to be more credit worthy, just higher level of reserves. The next highest level is a AA, and then it goes to single A. The lowest quote, what they call investment grade, is a BBB. And we got that. I mean, we surpassed that for the WIFIA bonds, and they required us to get that at a minimum. So, but there is a significant difference when you go from an A to a AA. It can be between 25 to 50 basis points, which is basically 1/4 to 0.5% interest on the difference in those ratings. So it can be pretty significant. So, we're not necessarily looking to issue bonds in the future, but let's say if we need a line of credit or just some temporary forms of financing, it definitely behooves the agency to get as high a rating as it can. And so that's what's been great, is that with the board really supporting us having a strong reserve policy and us making really good strides towards achieving those reserves, it puts us in much better financial position, not only for bond ratings, but also for grants as well too, because a lot of with grants, they require some sort of matching funds. And the more you have available to match for capital projects, obviously, the more we can achieve with our capital program. So,
Thank you.
next slide. So this is just kind of a follow-up comparison. This basically shows that we've made good progress in several areas, but we still have work to do. I mean, our reserves are still lower than our comparable agencies. Our pension coverage is lower. And I'll talk a little bit more about pensions in a little bit. I feel we really, given the limited size of our staff, I mean, we do a lot, for our customers. And it shows basically we're able to do all that we do in spite of our employees, the number of employees on average being less than our comparables. Paul mentioned this before, we have a lot of capacity in our plant. We do have a lot of debt, especially primarily with pure water. This does, for future capital improvements, will result in us primarily have to go as a pay-as-you-go basis and really looking for grants to fund us, because we don't have a lot of excess debt capacity as a result of between the initial phase for pure water and for expansion as well too. We're using most of it for that. And it's important that we continue to invest in our capital improvements. As you can see, our depreciated assets for wastewater is at 72%. That's significantly higher than our comparables. Our comparables are about 50%. So it really means, that capital improvement program that we're talking about, it's important that we invest in that because we really want to make sure to bring our level up at the plant to be a lot more current. And then debt, go ahead,
I was
Paul.
gonna say, and on the bottom there, you see the logos of the comparables that are used in these studies.
Oh yeah, thanks, Paul. And then, excuse me, the debt service kind of relates to the debt. Obviously, the more debt you have, the more debt service you've had. I do have to say, we've been fortunate to take advantage, for example, of SRF. The initial loan for the pure water was at 1%. So, obviously these days it's almost impossible to get a loan at that rate. So we've been fortunate. And even our WIFIA loan, we're keeping our fingers crossed, but we think it'll be under 4%. So again, pretty attractive rates for what we're able to do. Next slide. And so basically we're going to talk about the operating budget. Next slide. So yeah, highlights basically just talking about the revenues. As you know, we pretty much have 4 different funds. We have wastewater. That's by far our biggest activity. Basically a water recycling fund for agriculture. That's with our joint partnership with the Water Resources Agency. And I should say as part of the wastewater presentation, a portion that relates to the renewable energy as well too. And then we have pure water itself. So our total revenues that we're expecting to collect for next year is about 94 million. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a difference between the expense budget of 92. We're proposing to add a little bit to reserves for the wastewater budget, and also to meet the bond requirements for pure water. We're also adding some additional capital reserves in that budget as well too. So in the wastewater budget, the total of the 94 million, 59 relates to wastewater. By far, the largest portion is residential. For our customers, they're about 40 million. Commercial is about 9 million. And then we have a wide variety of other revenues. That's about another 9 million as well too. Pure water, just as a note too, it's based upon the assumption that we'll produce 4,300 acre feet of water next year. Basically, the way that works is 3,500 as a base for Cal-Am, the Water Management District, another 200 to add to their reserves, and then basically about another 600 for, I was going to say, the Marina Coast Water District as well too. Next slide. So this is basically just kind of 2 comparisons on this. This shows basically what our combined rates will be for all of our members for next year. You can see compared to the median, we are still pretty much on, at or below the median of our comparables. And they range pretty widely for our members. I mean, the lowest is Castroville. Castroville has no add-on fees, so they're about $44. Pretty much Pacific. I mean, the OR community is a relatively small segment, but PG is the highest at about $78. PG really has had they've wanted to reinvest a lot in their basically sewer collection system. So they do have a pretty significant add-on to our fee. And then what we always do the last few years is we compare ourselves to some of our surrounding entities as well too. And that's on the second chart that's over there. So you can see a pretty wide variety of what the others are charging. I mean, the lowest is Gilroy at about 47, but the highest actually is in next door in our area, Las Palmas. They're actually about $123. So, but I think the key thing to really note is if you look at the medians of those, we're still within or below that median, which behooves us well, I think. Yeah.
I'm just noticing, this slide does not match what's in the budget binder. You have 21, 22 median comparables and the rate, I mean, so
Yeah, we
will we be getting updated, information on that for,
when we present, and thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, when we present it on the 6th, you'll have an updated page,
thank you.
we updated that just yesterday, so.
Okay.
We wanted to have apples and apples in the years. And it changed.
Good answer.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Next slide. So basically on the expense side, kind of reflects in essence the three main components. One of the things I really want to point out is that bottom graph, basically, as you can see, it's a pretty even split, which is something we've really tried to achieve here at the agency. Personnel is about 26%, operations is about 37%, and then the capital part is also about 37%. So that's really what we've tried to aim for, is kind of an even split between those three areas. The personnel costs, they do include the COLAs in the MOU for next year. That is basically 3%. And just a reminder for the board, this is the last year of that MOU. Basically, we'll be coming up for negotiations later this year. It does include the projected increases in benefit costs, so including CalPERS. And then our insurance rates are expected to go up at least 10% for next year. So that's factored in. And some proposed personnel changes that Paul will talk about a little bit later. Our operating costs, unfortunately, we've really had some pretty significant increases in some areas of operations, primarily in chemicals and utilities, as a result of inflation that we've had the last couple of years. And it does incorporate the capital plan that Tammy will also talk about a little bit later as well, too. Next slide. And so, yeah, just to kind of remind, I'm sure the board is pretty well aware about this, but I always kind of remind the board about kind of where we're at naturally, economically. The rates right now, this has changed a little bit since March, but basically the 2-year treasury was about 4%. Retail sales have still continued to be pretty strong. The nice thing, the unemployment rate has continued to be relatively low. The inflation, although it has come down, is still relatively high. I mean, if you look at it, a few years ago, we were pretty much only about 2%. So it is still somewhat high. We're hoping with the measures that the Fed has done, that will continue to kind of go down. Obviously, a little bit of an unknown at this point is the discussion on the debt limit. We really haven't factored. We're assuming that hopefully they will raise the debt limit, so we won't have any issues related to that. So, next slide. So these are basically just some of the high. Oh, Paul, I forgot. Am I? Okay. So these are basically some of the highlighted goals that we had in this year budget, basically. And you can see there's really some main focus that we were trying to address with this year's budget. Number one is obviously capital. That was part of, obviously when we adopted the rate increase, was to continue to invest our capital. This does reflect the 3rd year of our adopted rate increase. Just to remind the board did adopt a 5-year rate plan through 25-26. So this does reflect that. And it's designed to really continue to invest in needed maintenance at our facility as well, too, to make sure that we're able to run 24/7. Obviously, we have a very critical operation here, and it's important that we're functional at all times. And that one of the things as well, too, and we'll be coming back to the board with this, but basically to continue to have a program where we provide assistance for our eligible low-income customers. We're going to continue to invest in related items related to cybersecurity. One of the capital projects for this year, we were able to get from the Fed's grant program will assist us with cybersecurity improvements, primarily related to our SCADA system. So we're pretty excited about that. In fact, it's over $1 million that we're getting to fund improvements. So it's a really good program. We'll be also coming back to the board, kind of like what we've done the last couple of years in probably September, to give you an annual update on all that we're doing related to cybersecurity. Paul mentioned this earlier, but we're going to continue to invest in projects that, allow us to make, take maximum advantage of renewable energy. We'll show you a little bit later, but we continue to really focus on our website on being a high level of providing high level of financial transparency for the public. Our safety, we're really proud to say that, we really maintain a high level of safety for the agency. And as you'll see a little bit later, the importance of training, just continuing to invest in our staff and continuing to have cross development among our staff so we can again, continue those critical 24/7 operations. And next slide. So staffing, I will turn over to Paul.
Thanks, Fred.
Yeah.
So during the budget personnel meeting, which I guess 3 of you are on that committee, we sort of put a spotlight on the requested personnel changes. The reason, even though it's a relatively small percentage of the budget and a small percentage of the salaries and benefits budget, is it's unusual for us. In the last 5 years, we've added under 4 positions. Actually, it ends up being 3.6 positions, and we've actually deleted 2 part-time positions. That's over a 5-year period. So this year is a little unusual because we are asking for, as you see here, 4 proposed additions. And then the next slide is going to go into some reclassifications. Those reclassifications oftentimes are, if you have someone who is an analyst 1 and they have so many years, they move to an analyst 2. So there's a number of those, but there's also some that are more strategic to get to meet the goals of the agency. So with that as a backdrop, just so everyone knows how we work things around here, is when there's additional work, the expectation is maybe some overtime if it's small amounts and it's not sustainable. If it's larger amounts, we bring a part-timer in or a limited term employee. As we start seeing workload increasing because of new services or new requirements, that's when we'll request additional people. So that's sort of the process we generally go through. In those 5 years, we think about what has changed here. And that's certainly what I ask our staff when they say, hey, we need more people. It's what's changed, why? And it comes down to a number of things. Certainly one is Pure Water Monterey expansion. It's a new beast there, Alexis. Same thing happened back when we brought SVRP online. We had to staff up because it's another treatment process. Second thing is we now are at a position with our reserves and our revenue to actually start spending on capital projects. Historically, we've been in that $3 to $4 million range. Now, I actually forget the number you said, Fred. Was it 11 or something like that?
Oh,
16.
Yeah.
So, and that's for the foreseeable future. In the 10-year plan, I think it was 183 million of capital projects, so about 18 a year. There's another $200 million in the following 10 years. So that's not going away. So some of the positions relate to having personnel to manage those projects. Another new service or new line of work is the renewable energy project in association with Regen Monterey, and just bringing that to fruition. And then lastly, you'll see on here, 5 years ago, well, actually 6 years ago, we didn't really have a legislative or grants department. And so we started. And how did we start? I ended up going to Sacramento or in DC. Mike and I would go. It was sort of an organic thing until we got a critical mass of that SRF loan, the SRF grants, and so on. And now we've hired a couple people. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. So since 2017, not the loans, not the 1% loans or the WIFIA loans, which are beasts in and of themselves to apply for and administer. You brought in about 90 something million dollars worth of grants. 98 million dollars worth of grants. This is something the board has directed us to do, and we're trying to respond accordingly and continue that. So with that as a backdrop of what's changed, the first 2 proposed additions are frankly to get the projects done, the capital projects, as well as make sure renewable energy gets to the point where it's benefiting all of our customers, that Pure Water Monterey expansion does occur and it gets done within those 2 years so we can produce water. I know Marina Coast has requested potentially doing another expansion for their use. So those two positions are primarily for the project related items. The grants and contract analyst, we're asking for a limited term employee of 3 years. The reason, there's currently a grants and contracts, not analyst, special administrator, thank you, that sort of splits time between grants, but also does contract administration. She's working on pure water monitor expansion. That's going to be done in 3 years. So we wanted to reevaluate at that point and not commit to a long-term expense stream, but recognize that there's a need now to make sure we continue to get those grants and administer them properly. I think many of you know, I was once in a position where I got a $1.2 million grant. I shouldn't say I did, the team did at a different agency. We didn't administer it to the T, which can get crazy, as all of you know, and we had to give that money back. I never want to be in that position again. It was not the best day ever. And then the last proposed addition is an operator, a wastewater treatment plant operator. As you know, I think some of you have actually been up to our control room. There's 20 screens. They operate the treatment plant, the recycled water facilities, CSIP, source water facilities, the 26 pump stations that we operate and maintain for the cities, as well as the injection wells. We need, frankly, from a safety perspective, 2 people on site 24/7. During the daytime, it's obviously much more when you can get more work done, and it's just an added operator position for coverage. As you can imagine, you're working, I'm going to make this up, but you're working from midnight to 8, and there's 2 of you and someone calls in sick. It wreaks havoc with the schedule when you have that shift work going on. Also on here, you'll see sort of just some different way to slice and dice the full-time distribution of, it's obviously primarily plant positions out of the treatment plant under Tammy's purview, admin here, and then we separate what is reclamation or the agricultural irrigation side of things. Next slide, just so we can go into the proposed reclassifications.
Just for a point of clarification and through the
Go ahead.
chair, is it appropriate to ask questions as the slides are in front of us? Or, I mean, I know we've kind of been doing that informally, but I want to make sure that we're respectful of the process.
Well, I was sort of hoping we'd hold our questions to the end, but obviously my vice chair was
Jumping on.
Started it.
I'm that guy.
yeah. Can you hold?
I'm happy to. Yeah, that's fine.
All right, very good. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
So on the proposed reclassifications, we've broken it down into administrative staff and at the treatment plant. And as you see, a number of them employee services analysts from 1 to 2. And I can certainly explain these in greater detail. They're existing positions that we're just shifting. Some of it is as simple as lab tech, lab intern increase in hourly wages. They've been static for I don't know how long, Lyra, and we are paying a little under what In-N-Out Burger gets. And in looking at the comparables, in order to frankly compete and get qualified people, it's going up a couple dollars an hour. Okay, so there's things as simple as that, and then there's others that, frankly, director of information services. We have an IS manager position that has been open since September. We've gone out to advertise. In our opinion, we have not received qualified candidates. We expect a high degree of performance, particularly in a position like that. And so it's a reclassification from the finance manager position, adding some funds to have an appropriate salary that is commensurate with the job description that is going to be expected, and it's director of information services. In general, oh, and I'll point out another one just because you know him. Our operations manager is currently our chief plant operator. The reason he was a chief plant operator when he got the job is, frankly, he didn't have the supervisory experience at that point in time. He has all the other qualifications. And at this point, he does have that required experience. So we're proposing moving him to an operations manager position to be, once again, commensurate with the other managers that report to Tammy in terms of title. In all, the 4 proposed additions, and then these 12 reclassifications represent an added $735,000 in this budget that you see before you. It's already in here. It's not like on top of. And what that is in reference to our salaries and benefits number, you saw that 30% on the bottom of the pie chart. It's about 3.6% addition to the personnel budget. This does not impact our rates, as Fred identified before. We're within that existing Prop 218, and we're not asking for anything additional. And it is expected to be that through the end of this Prop 218. So with that.
And I'll continue on. Basically, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this basically kind of focuses on kind of the main debt issues that we have. So we really have 4 at this point. The good news is actually number 1, and this we've brought this up with the board before. We do have 2 bonds outstanding. One is a 2012 pension bond, which I mentioned earlier, funded our side fund with CalPERS, and then basically a 2013 basically capital improvement bond. Those are all due to mature in fiscal year 25-26. That's going to free up about a little bit over $2 million in debt service that on an annual basis that we can use in combination to potentially add to additional amounts to capital reserves and or fund additional capital projects. The USBR loans, those are basically funded 100% by contributions from the Water Resources Agency related to projects that we've done in the past. The Pure Water loan, as we mentioned before, is a very attractive loan. It's only 1% a year interest that does go through 2049, and that's funded through, the water purchase agreement with CalAM and the Water Management Agency. I do want to point out a little bit about the net pension liability. Right now, the payment on that is about $2 million annually. That, unfortunately, kind of like pretty much all the cities, it's expected to go up significantly next year. What happened when they did the valuation on this, they're always about a year or 2 behind in doing the valuations. So this was based upon their rate of return of 21.6% in fiscal year 2021. Unfortunately, the next year, they actually had a negative return of 6.1%. That's on top of they didn't meet their expected rate of return of 6.8%. So in essence, they undermet themselves by about 13%. So I expect this to go up pretty substantially when we present this, for next year to the board in essence. Paul, did you want to say something on that?
No, I'm thinking about the cumulative nature.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But the good thing is we still continue to have very good, strong debt coverage. We're at about almost 300%, projected for next year. So that's a really good level of coverage, much significantly better than we were even at a few years ago. So next slide. And again, just to follow up on the pensions, as we talked about earlier, we really are trying to do several things to help lower that liability for us in the future. What we've done is we've issued pension bonds, as I've mentioned before, to help pay off the per side fund liability. The board approved basically the approval of some pension trust funds, which are going to look to start to begin to pay down that liability. We budgeted for about a $400,000 payment into that for next fiscal year. What we do every year, we've done this year and we'll continue to do in the future because our reserves are at a good enough level. The annual payment that we have to make to CalPERS on basically that accrued liability. In the past, we had to pay it over a monthly period because it was pretty significant. Now we make the whole payment at the beginning of the year, and we save ourselves about 6 months worth of interest as a result. So pretty significant, saves us a little bit over $100,000 each year by doing that. And then the other thing we've been doing is all the employees, basically the existing employees, they pay the entire amount of the employee share. And the people that are in the 2 at 55 plan and the 3 at 60 plan, they also pay a portion of the employer share as well too. So again, all of these really, they may seem little individually, but they all add up pretty significantly when looked at together in essence. So next slide. And it's important when we're looking at this to really look at our long-term forecast. And we're really continuing to make good progress towards hitting our 2 goals of basically achieving to make a 50% operating reserve and ultimately within 10 years, a 20% capital reserve for a 10-year capital plan. Now, there's a couple of things I do want to point out on this. This does assume Our rates are approved through 25, 26. It does assume in the next 5 years after that, that the rates would go up on average between 8 to 9% a year. And we factored in basically on our expense side, as you know, unfortunately, inflation, has continued to be high the last couple of years. We're assuming inflation on our personnel expense side with CalPERS and Health to be around 10% and our other operating expenses to be about 6%. So we factored all of this into the forecast. And as Paul mentioned earlier, it also factors in and on average that we're investing about $18 million a year in our capital plan as well too. So pretty significant investment in our capital plan. And if we, Paul talked about this earlier, if we're able to get additional grants, that will allow us to fund even more capital improvements on top of that. Next slide. This is kind of a new slide that we did for this year. It kind of relates back to the earlier point I talked about as far as some of the goals, as far as what our demographics is as part of staff goes. As you know, obviously we have pretty significant investment in our capital infrastructure, but if you think about it, the people here at Monterey One Water, they're a very important part of our infrastructure as well too. So we really just wanted to give you a brief overlook as kind of the diversity of our workforce here at Monterey One Water. So as you can see, it's pretty split. I mean, we have about half the workforce with pretty much under 5 years of experience. So that investment in training is really important because of that. But on the other hand, we have over 48% that have been here pretty much over 10 years almost. So it's a pretty significant diversity of what we have here. The same goes as far as average age. We've got about a third of the people that are less than 40 years old, about half in the mid-range. But we do have a significant number that potentially are eligible for retirement in the next few years. And so that's something, again, we want to keep reinvesting in our staff so that we can handle transitions effectively for our staff. Next slide. And again, I talked about this earlier about transparency. We really strive on being, trying to provide an excellent level of transparency, for the public and for the board. So this really just gives you an example of kind of what we have on our website. We have a lot of disclosures on the website related to our budget, our annual financial report, pensions, our investment reports, and several other areas as well too. It's important for us to really help have the public feel as though, they have readily access to our information and they're well aware of all the great activities that we do here at Monterey One Water. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Tammy. She's going to talk about the capital plan.
So this is the fun part of the chat. I'm going to basically focus on the wastewater fund. So any of the other projects as far as SVRP, SRDF, and pure water will not be included in this. This is just the wastewater fund itself. So on the left, you'll include the RTP, and on the right, basically the pump stations. And keep in mind that our plant is over 30 years old, and some of the pump stations are even over 50 years old. So that's what we're dealing with to try to maintain system reliability. So we have a comprehensive 10-year plan, as Paul and Fred had talked about. Basically a little over $18 million per year is what we are anticipating. Of that, the majority thereof will be associated with plant improvements. We also have interceptors, as Paul was talking about earlier. That's when the large pipes take the water flow from the different cities that are part of our JPA. So we have over 100 projects that are already identified. Keep in mind that these projects have been on our CIP for 10, 15 years. And what we do is we reprioritize each project every year to determine what new ones have been added and where they fall in based on risk assessment. And that's basically consequence of failure and consequence probability of failure. So we take those scores and determine which ones we need to go to the top, because as you're aware, we don't have unlimited fundings. We're basically playing catch up and have been playing catch up as a direct result of years without fully investing into upgrading our system. Basically, we've mortgaged our future. Next slide. So of the 6.9 million that you see in this graph, these are all associated with plant and pump projects. It's a subset of the wastewater capital budget, which this year was 11.3 million. So the 6.9 represents 60% of this year's budget. The remaining 40% is made up of capital outlay, capital maintenance, and grants, but I'm going to focus on the projects themselves. So if you look over to the right, you see Seaside and Monterey pump stations. That was a big project, 3.2, but keep in mind, that's only a portion. We started with the design. We're 95% done with the design. We will go out for bid in 3 weeks for construction. And basically, when we take an upgrade for the pump station, it deals with piping, the surge tanks, pumps, the electrical, most all of them, the electrical is original to that particular pump station. And in this case, basically back in the 70s. The next largest piece of the pie is 1.2, which is the Headworks project. And we implemented that right after the large release in the ocean. This is the third year of that project for 1.2. They were supposed to finish June of this fiscal year. However, due to the supply chain delays, they'll finish in August. So we have 8 shutdowns between now and when they finish in August for them to wrap up. So that was a significant project. And then electrical gear, basically we're in design for that, and that's going to be several million over the next 3 years. Go ahead and go to the next one, please. So the proposed capital budget for fiscal year 23-24 basically is $16.1 million, of which 9.7 will be for the plant and pump station improvements. And I'll go through the projects that we're proposing. So next slide. So the proposed projects include, so you see the largest 3.4 is the digester, the mixers that will be installed as part of the Energia project. Keep in mind, we also have grant monies. That entire project is $8.2 million. The next biggest part of the pie is almost $2 million dealing with water flow projects. Just want to pull out to the side the fire pump storage tanks. That was on the 2004 CIP, but got pulled. And so we have basically been renting tanks ever since then. So a lot of projects, they get bumped for various reasons. Then we've got $1.8 million for Monterey and Seaside. Remember, those are 3-year projects. I've already talked about them. Pump Station 15 is the Coral Street that had adverse action regarding the king tides. And so we've received a little over 400,000 in federal monies. And this particular year, we've got 102, which is our matching for that grant. But keep in mind that on the books, we have another 10 million to upgrade that station. So this is just a part of it. Most of these projects are multi-year. So you'll see a couple million, but yet it goes for 3 to 5 years. Moss Landing this year, we are proposing to remove the underground storage tank, but there's another $12.5 million on the books for an upgrade of that. I also wanted to point out the corrosion control program. Before I got here, we had about $1 million in working on the corrosion control program. As you guys are aware, we have adverse environment, both the ocean and wastewater. And so there are various projects and they're prioritized. However, when I got here 5 years ago, there was no money in the budget for corrosion control. We slowly added it to where our goal is to get back up to that $1 million. And so just wanted to point that out. So if we had more money, we have places to spend it. But that's basically the capital improvements associated with the wastewater fund that we're proposing for 22-23 with what we've got in this year's budget, which is why it was important for the personnel, because 3 of the 4 are associated with getting money in and also spending the money. So that's all I have.
Great. Thanks, Shai. So that obviously you've received the budget document, which is fairly voluminous. Brenda and staff have done a great job putting it together, and of course worked with everyone here at the agency in this iterative approach to bringing in a budget that we feel meets the needs and the goals of the agency as well as stays within the confines of the revenue. I think you all know, but this is to receive comments, any direction you may have. The actual approval of the budget will be at the June 5th board meeting, which is sort of an unusual time, but historically, this workshop has been in June. We just moved it up a little bit to have a little more buffer before the end of the fiscal year. So with that, any questions you may have? And
So just to be clear, what you're looking for is any final tweaks and guidance from the board and head nods on that.
yes.
Okay, so why don't we go around the horn and we'll start with Kimberly with questions and comments.
Thank you. So I have just a couple, I'm gonna try to call out slide numbers. I think that's probably the easiest way. Slide 16, the debt service obligations. And this is minimal, but I just, the two pie charts don't add up. And I'm wondering, it seems like that's the same thing, only done differently. Is that correct?
I mean, it's both talking or about our long-term debt. And you're right, one is just pure water versus other, and the one to the right is
More,
discrete.
right. So we have 74 and 76% and 26% and 24%. So I think maybe somebody just switched percentages there, maybe, because they don't match up.
Well, we'll go back afterwards and fix that. There
Yeah.
might be something that's just
No
not
problem.
rolling up.
No, and great point. And this is exactly what we've been doing all week, is going through this. and
I'm
going through-
sure, like yeah, and I have a couple others, but I want to talk about the PowerPoint first. And then slide 14, going back to the proposed staffing positions. And so one of the questions I asked you when I did a one-on-one was, how many open positions outside of adding additional positions? How many open positions do you currently have?
And I'm gonna look over at Lyra, who
Right.
is our employee services person. And I think when we were talking, I was like, I think it's like 15. It was fairly
Significant, yeah.
because of that whole trying to find people in this environment.
13, okay. I mean, so the reason why I'm asking those questions, because obviously when you're trying to like find the financial, balance, right? Having a ton of open positions, what do you do with the salary savings when you don't have those positions open?
Yeah, typically.
I mean, when you don't fill those positions.
Yeah, so let me answer that a little bit. So, I mean, we try to do a balance, obviously, when we do the budget each year between capital investment, and savings. So, and what we do is kind of like during the year, if we have stuff that comes up that, for example, I'll give you an example. We talked about this earlier with chemicals and utilities. They were significantly higher than what we had in the budget. So unfortunately, we've had personnel vacancies, but we were able to kind of use some of those savings to kind of offset those additional costs. We do typically we will have some vacancies each year. And what we try to do is basically, as much as possible with those, reinvest those in the capital and operating reserves to kind of meet the board's goals of meeting those, over time.
So they don't stay in personnel. You actually take it and transfer it to reserves.
What they will basically be reinvested in reserves at year end. Yeah.
Got it.
So they
absolutely.
stay in personnel during the fiscal
During
year.
the
At the
fiscal
end of
year.
fiscal year, they go into
That's exactly.
Reserve.
Start the new year with a.
New number.
That's exactly
Got it.
right. That's
Okay.
exactly right.
And then I just am curious, part of the reason why I'm asking is because there's this emphasis that you're having trouble filling positions. Has the agency done a salary study?
Is that microphone working? Okay. Larry, would you mind? Yes. So we've done them. It's been a few years now. And it's based on, I'll let Lyra talk about the comparables and how deep we go into them. Formal ones, meaning have someone else do it, or frankly, our staff does it as well, since we know what the comparables are and you can go into their websites and find it. But
so the last, I guess, formal salary survey that we did was back in 2015, I believe.
Oh, wow, long time.
We've done in-house surveys just with me and my staff, Diana. We'll look at, just the comparables that we have, which is kind of listed in the PowerPoint, but Yeah, we have 11 comparable agencies. There are other wastewater agencies that do similar things that we do. We look at their positions that are similar to ours, and we have kind of a plus or minus 5% is kind of our philosophy. Over the last, I would say, 3 years, I have noticed that the salaries where we used to be within the plus or minus 5 are now 7% under, 10% under. So the most recent one that we did in-house definitely showed that 50% of them are probably 10 to 12% under. Others are about within the 5 or 10%. So the plan is, which is included in this year's budget, is to do a total comp study with a firm so that we can have that for the next round of negotiations.
So we'll be in negotiations next
January.
January.
Okay.
And so we do want to be informed for the board and whoever, how we're doing.
So that's intended in this upcoming like 6 to 7 months then?
Yes.
Understood. Okay. And the reason why I ask, so when I had my briefing with Paul, he showed me actually the salaries of the requested new positions. And I was really surprised, like the engineers here make a lot more money than the city of Salinas engineers. And so I was like, well, that's interesting because as a member agency, I'm now competing against myself in terms of trying to bring people into the city of Salinas versus how we're paying in here. But what I'm hearing is that there's a difficulty in filling positions. And so the answer to that would be to see what other local agencies and local jurisdictions are paying for some of those similar positions. And that's why I was asking. 2015 is a long time. You should do it probably every 4 to 5 years. So I'm encouraged to hear that that's in this upcoming budget. And I think that's really important, particularly to determine salaries. And when you're asking, when you have so many open vacancies and you're asking for additional positions on top of that. So those are my two big things on the PowerPoint. On the budget itself. There was an inconsistency in the finances on, I think it was on page 6. The wastewater proposed capital plan has a laundry list of proposed budget items, and the numbers don't match up. I count 15.2 million versus the 16.1 million.
Yeah, there's obviously some minor one. I mean, the list, we tried to basically list the major ones. So there's ones that are not on the list, but the total is 16.1. So,
Kimberly, are you talking about the executive summary or the capital budget summary?
Sorry, page, hold please.
Staff report.
Oh, the staff report.
Yep,
I'm sorry.
staff
I'm
report.
sorry.
Page 6 of the of the big binder.
The big one. Got
Yeah,
it.
I apologize. And so, yeah, I was just trying to, maybe there can be another category
Sure.
with the remaining amount, just because
absolutely.
that's
Yeah, when we bring,
important that 2 and 2 equals 4,
absolutely. When we bring it back.
particularly in a budget binder.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we bring out the 5th, we'll update it for that. Absolutely.
And then this is just sort of a request on my end. A letter of transmittal would be great. And just a 1 page at the very front that shows exactly what the CIP is. I know that you have beautiful pictures in the budget summary, but I don't know. I see that at the Solid Waste Authority. The city of Salinas provides one, just kind of a quick overall summary. Just a thought.
Yeah, what we do, just so you know, and we can look to do this, is typically what we do is after the budget's adopted, we put on the website like a 2-page summary of the budget. So we can look to potentially kind of do that when we bring it back. I don't know if we'll have it for the 5th, but we'll try. So.
Yeah, in the reasoning for my ask, just so that there's context behind it, is because while we as a board, I mean, this is our Bible for the year, right? Like this is what we reference everything and all of the projects and whatnot, but the general public doesn't necessarily know where to look for something in this. And so keeping it really simple and transparent for the public. Even, I joke about the Denny's menu where you just point to things on a menu because there's so many pictures, but a letter of transmittal is really a really simplistic way to say, this is exactly what, our CIP budget is. This is exactly what our operating is. And this is how many employees we have, just a really simplistic statement.
Yeah, we do a 2-page budget summary basically every year. So what we can look to do, we'll try and get that for the 5th.
Yeah, and you know what, in future years, if the board wants it, we can just do that earlier.
Yeah.
And if the budget changes in the process, you change the summary.
Yeah, we'll just add it as another attachment.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you. Those were my questions and comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Director Craig. Director Garcia Arizona.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and apologies for being a little late. I have a question for Ms. Sampson. If sorry for making you get up again. But you did mention that the most recent salaries showed 50% of employees were under. When was that conducted?
I think the latest was done end of April of this year.
Okay,
And that's just our in-house survey that we do to kind of prep for the total comp study. So we'll at least have a baseline of where we think all the employees are.
perfect. And what's your current turnover rate?
So, well, Lear's getting that, if I may. So in the past, what we said is let's do the comparables of our industry peers. And we're going to try to be plus or minus 5% of the median. So right dead in the middle, you know, there's obviously error in these things. So that plus or 5%,
Yeah.
plus or minus 5%. So when she says 50% or under, it's under that band.
Gotcha. Okay.
You go ahead with
So
the,
for turnover, currently, since we only have like the first quarter data, we're about 3.3%. But last year we were at 15.5%. In 21, we were at 17%. And in 2020, we were at 20.7%.
so Lyra, I mean, my numbers may be wrong, but I thought it was like, in the last 3 years, to your point, Alexis, didn't we have like 57 employees either retire, resign, or be terminated?
Close, 51.
51. Okay. So when we're at 101 employees, that's pretty significant. Obviously, I think all of our entities have probably experienced a certain amount of increased resignations or retirements particularly.
Yeah.
But that's why it's a little tough on Lyra and Diana.
So of those 51, how many were retirements?
13,
10 terminations, right?
10 terminations, 27 resignations.
When I wonder how.
Keep in mind that terminations, maybe somebody didn't make their probation, so it's not like they've been here for 5 years and we terminated them. They just didn't make the, and I don't know if you have a division there.
8, 2.
I think,
That one's an easy one. 8 did make probation and 2 were terminations
no, it's just-
outside of that.
so, and what we're seeing is, and Lyra, please expand on this. People are going to other agencies. I mean, we're getting poached, in all honesty. And I think that happens probably with a lot of your entities. You're a training ground, right? And we're starting to see the same thing.
When
Is
I-
that a fair statement?
I wonder how much the pandemic has affected some of our workforce as well, when, you know, a lot of people were able to work from home and people were concerned about the impacts of having to come into the workplace because the jobs require that in this agency.
Great resignation.
Yeah. And yeah, a lot of our comparables, you have to come in when you're an operator, a maintenance person, or in a lab. So it is consistent in terms of working remotely, but you're right. I think there has been an impact. We've seen a shift, frankly, in the last 4 years.
Perfect. And then there was mention that there was a position that was paying roughly around the same as In and Out, correct?
That would be our lab intern positions.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. How much? I just want, no, it is. No. I think it opens up the discussion that inflation is going at a high rate, right? We can't just keep earning so little when things are getting more expensive. As a college graduate, I remember being in college getting paid at a time. Back then, it was an internship at $18 an hour, which I thought was making big bucks, right? And if we're paying someone roughly around $15 to $17, I started that, 6 years ago? And that hasn't changed. So to me, that's one, worrisome, and two, it further reinforces young individuals to move out of the area to pursue jobs in the Bay Area or Southern California. So I think that I just wanted to point that out, because to me that's a huge, it would open, if we increase it, it would open an opportunity for more people to stay here locally and more graduates to stay here after graduation. So, okay. And I had one more question. I wrote somewhere, but I'll leave it at that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Garcia Arizona. We'll go to Director Colette. I'll come back to the Vice Chair.
Got it.
Well,
Well-
Vice Chair.
Yeah, all right. Well, I guess as far as an alternate perspective or a perspective from an alternate, I I think one of the things that I came away with was that some of the open positions could be just simply due to the high standards that this organization has to have to run. I mean, the last thing you want to read in the newspaper is a spill. And that takes a lot of trained personnel to do. And the organization is in a growth phase right now. So these 4 positions seem to align with that reality, and it seems perfectly reasonable to me. So,
All right. Thank you, Director Colette. Director Donaldson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A lot of my questions were already answered, personnel questions about how many open positions and the turnover rate. But do we have any positions that were eliminated? I don't know if I saw anything like that.
Yeah, actually, Chai, can you pop into, if it's okay to add a slide, and maybe it'll prompt Lyra's memory, the one of the other slides we had behind number 32. So positions were eliminated. Oh, you mean from what was requested or overall in the past 5 years?
Overall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the past 5 years, we did have a couple years where we eliminated positions. I think everyone did, particularly when the pandemic hit and our revenues all dropped. So I don't know if this is a good enough prompt for you or not, Lyra. I apologize for putting you on the spot.
It's the lyric show.
Exactly. So what you see here is just splitting between full-time employees and part-time. There were times that sometimes we request that those part-time positions, as I was alluding to, the workload has increased so much, we request a full-time position. Of course, in 2021, because our finances were looking so poor at the beginning of the pandemic, there were the 5 that were eliminated. Some of them were, like Kimberly was saying, we hadn't filled the position. So it was like, okay, we're not filling them. We're getting them off the books for now. Like there was one that was a principal engineer. I don't remember any of the others, but we tried to do a judicious look at maintaining that minimum level of service and trying to reduce as best as we can. So hence the reason you see this now. I know it was unfair to put Lyra on the spot, and we can certainly get those for you, Scott, in terms of what positions have been eliminated over the period of time in question.
No, this is good. I mean, I just noticed here the 23, 24, there's no part-time position. Then we got the 4 that are represented in what you just briefed, right?
Yeah, so we're not asking for any additional part-timers.
Okay.
There are 7 part-time or temps reflected in the budget that are currently at the agency.
Mm-hmm. And do you see any other positions out there that are like the ones you described where it's very difficult to fill them, that, hey, there's a few others out there that might fall in a similar situation and be eliminated?
So, yeah. So the ones that are really hard to fill, in my perspective, and I'll let Lyra chime in, some of the technical ones, IT manager, SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition, instrumentation people, engineers, like we've talked about. There's such high demand out there that they're getting snapped up and the salaries are going up.
Mhm.
For the last 3 years, our SCADA person, we haven't been able to get one.
5
So-
years.
5 years. I was trying to be optimistic. We've been contracting it out. It's far more expensive to do that, and you're not retaining that knowledge in-house, but we got to at least get the work done. So if we get to the point where SCADA people are all demanding a bajillion dollars, I think we would have to pivot and go, it's going to be all consultant based, and we're going to like meter out the work because we just can't find someone. I guess that's how we generally would try to approach things. Do you have any thoughts on the?
Those are pretty
difficult-
much the typical positions. I think the hardest is definitely the SCADA, but then most recently our electrical and operators.
Yeah.
We have had a really tough time getting operators that have that level of experience that we're looking for. So we're starting to pivot a little bit to looking at maybe an operator one or an intern or an OIT and bringing them up to, the grade threes. Downside, it just takes time, and that means more overtime for the current operator twos and threes that are at the site.
And thank you for bringing up operators. We've been losing them to other plants.
Mhm.
And frankly, I'm somewhat fearful on some of our wastewater plant operators who have the pure water certification, that's advanced water treatment certification. There's not many of them in the state, and the demands are increasing. So we don't want to lose them. But that's a fear, frankly. And I think many of well, we offered a position to an operator from Southern California. I guess you don't count the chicken, until they're hatched type thing. I might have gloated a little bit going, hey, we're going to steal one of your operators because we all know each other in the industry. The guy turned us down because the housing prices here were too much. So I learned not to gloat before we get the people. Because they're always doing that to me, by the way.
And, these are all great questions because they'll ultimately manifest themselves in operations,
One way or
I
another.
look at the highlights here and when you see the personnel situation on slide 13, the highlighted goals, which would have the greatest impact because of those personnel issues. I mean, in other words, are we still going to be able to deliver what we need to in terms of those goals that we have based on the personnel shortages that we have? Are there any potentials there?
So, certainly the top three, capital, sustainability, and system operation. That's something we're always striving for, but without the right people, it's hard.
Mhm.
You jump down to cybersecurity. How much of our system is operated remotely through SCADA and those, the 20 monitors, literally I counted them the other day, there's 20 monitors up there in our control room that operate all that stuff. So it is a balance for us. I mean, we obviously push to get the people in so we can meet our level of service that's expected and do a lot of those other things like the renewable energy or bringing in grants and stuff like that. And that's why I lean on Lyra a lot. And last year it was like bad news Tuesday every time we met because
Mhm.
we lost someone, or she just did the comparables and this group of employees appear to be underpaid compared to industry. The succession planning, training, attracting and retaining people is one of the key things that frankly the board told me get on it, and so we're working on it. It's difficult.
Yeah, I guess I'm more concerned that, so you've done that analysis where, you've looked at the personnel situation, its potential impacts on operation
Yep.
and, okay. And, in terms of how much money you've allocated in those areas, you've made an analysis then.
When you say amount of money allocated to an area, are you
Right.
saying-
I'll say the highlighted goals like, website, safety, training, you're going to have a certain amount. Well, you do have a certain amount allocated towards that.
Yes.
The personnel issues that we have you gone through the analysis of, okay, maybe we won't be able to have, the website to the level that we need, or, the safety program might be in jeopardy in certain areas unless we give more money to it. That's, I just want to make sure that that's been done.
We've certainly prioritized resources. And when I say resources, it's, hours, people hours, as well as dollars. In terms of an analysis down to a specific dollar amount compared to that level of service, I don't know that we've gotten that granular. And certainly an easy one to look at just is safety and risk management does report to Lyra. She has a safety person that reports to her. There are things that we have to do that are now in the budget, but that haven't been. So safety is not one that we want to jeopardize. But in terms of getting down to a specific dollar amount necessary, we're just trying to cut away at the priority list at this point.
Right. I'm not looking down to the dollar amount, just kind of, just understanding where you might not be able to get where you want to be.
Yes.
And then it becomes that prioritization of, which one of these goals is going to be kind of put to the side a little bit. That's all the purpose of my question, really. And then the last one is on slide 23. Tammy, you've done a great job with the corrosion control program, adding more money to it. I'm a big preventative maintenance guy. I mean, because it manifests itself in savings down the road and, longer equipment life and so on. Do you think you'll be able to continue to do that? Add like you have been? Okay. And
That's my goal. I wish we were already up at 1 million, but if you want to know the truth of the matter, we've already done cuts. This is like the second version and this was up to 900,000 and it got cut. But my goal is by next year, we would be back at 12. And if there's any monies left over that at the end of the year, then certainly that's the first place that I would put it is in the corrosion control program.
okay, good. Because I see that as a priority too. I mean, it's always tough because you can't see it immediately, but it's so important. And then the last question is, so if there is a debt default, I know it's very unlikely it'll happen. What kind of impact is it going to have on us?
So I'd like Mike and Fred to talk about it, but it is going to impact when we can close or execute that WIFIA loan. So at this point, the projection was June 15th to close that thing and execute it. And, they've been saying for a while now, we need to keep an eye on the debt ceiling discussion because that could just unfortunately blow it out of the water. And we don't know for how long. Mike, Fred, is that a reasonable?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a little bit on it. We talked actually with the WIFIA legal team today, kind of regarding that a little bit. They don't think it will impact their ability to basically close the loan because they're kind of funded a little bit separately from most of the federal government. Obviously, our concern is potentially what the rate might go, if it might go up significantly. We talked a little bit strategy wise, whether or not we wanted to move up, the date, but our concern was if you moved it up, like especially around June 1st, you could really have a lot of volatility in the rate. So we thought, okay, we're going to leave it at June 15th. Worst comes to worst, if it's still really volatile at that point, we might slightly push it back because we won't be going to the board, with any contracts until July. So we do have a little wiggle room on that. So, but we're anticipating right now that it will close on June 15, and we're hoping it'll stay below that 4%. So.
But that's a great question because the number of times with projects that we've had global issues affect us is starting to get annoying. I don't know if you remember the hurricane 4 years ago that hit the Carolinas. Our switchgear was delayed. Our switchgear was coming out of North Carolina. They're like, hey, the hurricane hit, everything's flooded. We can't get you what you need for pure water. Solve that. Next one that came along was, do you remember the embargo with China? Our membranes come from China. Literally, I think they were on the boat being transferred when the embargo came down, but we didn't know that. So at that point, we're like, are we not going to have membranes for a treatment plant that's sitting there? And now this debt ceiling thing, it's it's really interesting how interrelated everything is and how it affects down at this level.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
Thank you, Director Donaldson. We'll go to Director Stefani, followed by Director Askew, followed by Vice Chair Williamson. Director Stefani.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any. I think all my questions have been answered.
Outstanding. Director Askew.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. I appreciate the conversation about staffing. I think that sounds like a pretty critical issue that deserves more conversation and attention. We know everywhere that we look, it's really challenging to hire staffing at all levels, especially the highly technical engineering level staff. So need to make sure we're compensating accordingly so that we can remain competitive and keep people in these key positions. I did there've been a couple comments about how end of the year reserve balance is allocated. And I just wanted to make sure there was clarity on that. I heard that it would go to the corrosion prevention program, but I also heard that it would go back into reserves. And I'm not sure if there is a board policy, or if there should be a board policy on how end of year account balances are handled. And then my final question is just around the reserves for the agency, trying to make sure, I guess I appreciate that there is a path forward to bringing those reserves up to where they need to be. I'm just reflecting on the reality that the county has experienced with the need to spend down significantly our strategic reserves this last year in response to circumstances that were outside of our control. And as we look at continuing weather system impact to infrastructure, I just want to, I guess, stress my interest in seeing those reserves prioritized to be healthy and strong so that we are prepared as an agency to weather whatever storms may be ahead of us, whether it's, trade agreements, debt ceiling issues, natural disasters, or the need for lending, borrowing at competitive rates for future capital projects. So it's great to step in as an alternate. I don't get to have these conversations all the time. So I'll leave my questions more as comments for consideration by staff and the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Askew. Vice Chair Williamson.
Yeah, so on that point that was just being made about a board policy, and I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but to the extent that it makes a difference, I would hope that we can find a way of being more aggressive in our investment into the reserves in the budget. And then if it would be a compromise, allowing any additional funding left at the end of the year, whether it be from personnel or otherwise, to be given to CIP. So I'm trying to make Tammy happy here a little bit, but and the reason why I say this is if we can be more aggressive, I know that there was the slide that had indicated the plan in regards to how much we'll provide year over year for the reserves. But to all the points that Wendy had just indicated, things could happen along the way that don't allow us to fully get there. And I think if I recall correctly, we were anticipating putting more into reserves this year than we're actually doing. And so, this can happen moving forward. And, just adding to the list, if the economy crashes, we might find ourselves in a situation where we're not able to be as aggressive. So I see maybe some interest in wanting to make comments, and I'm open for staff's feedback on that.
May I make
for the unfunded liability?
may I make a comment to that? Because Tammy mentioned we hacked on this budget multiple times to bring it down to be where it is. And part of it, there isn't, to answer Supervisor Askew's comment, there isn't a board policy of at the end of the year when we've saved $1 million in personnel that it goes X or Y. As we said, it sort of goes into the starting balance for the subsequent year. So this particular year, you're absolutely right. We didn't have as much in our reserves. And frankly, we didn't have as much in capital when we first started looking at the budget. And it was sort of somewhat artful. It was a call of, I remember sitting and doing presentations to a lot of your councils, and we did it to a lot of community organizations saying, we're going to fund capital. So we could have put more into reserves, but what we decided was sort of a split to increase our capital to that 11 million, as well as add some to reserves. So it wasn't going all in one or the other. It was truly trying to balance. And that's the sort of stuff, the calls that we make as utility managers. And certainly if the board would like to see something different, like, no, reduce your reserves, put more in capital, but if there's savings at the end, put it in reserves, or vice versa. We're just trying to balance it, knowing the two primary goals that not only the board stated, but that we've told the public of reserves and capital expenditures.
So, and I just recognize, and I see you want to jump in. I recognize there is the need to balance, right? Because there are capital assets that need to be maintained, and some things are extremely deficient, and that can cost us in the long run too, if we're not on top of that. And I think we've experienced that, at least since I've been on the board. So I understand the balance. I feel like there's value in prioritizing, to the extent possible, a more aggressive approach to our reserves. And part of it is the point that was made about our rating. And so, what does that look like, and the effects on that? And then, our potential transition to the tax rolls. And I think we're setting ourselves up this year to be okay for that. But still, these are the types of things that I feel would be helpful for a more aggressive reserve policy. And then once we get there, once we reach that board policy in regards to where those need to be, that frees us up to be able to do all these other things in a more aggressive way.
And Paul, if you don't mind, I just want to add just a couple quick comments to his great comments. One of the things, it kind of goes back to Paul's point about doing a balance. And we talked about this at the exact team level. We said, okay, what we're going to do, because our additions to reserves were relatively low proposed for next year, but we still want to have caution in the budget. So we actually increased our contingency. That's actually part of the overall budget. We typically before would have about a 2% operating reserve and a 10% operating reserve. My concern in particular was inflation's been much higher than that the last couple of years. So actually in the expenditure budget, we took it up to a 5% operating contingency and still left it at 10. But the 10, remember, because we have a bigger capital improvement plan, that's still a larger dollar amount as well too. So the idea is if we don't spend that basically also can be added to reserves as well too. Another thing as well too is the Energia project. There's two parts to that. There's a grant funded portion of that project, which obviously will get reimbursed from grants. There's also a second part that has to do with energy credits. Again, we wanted to be a very conservative approach on that because we're not exactly sure when we're going to get that back. So we said, okay, we're going to just treat that as part of an allocation of the wastewater budget for next year. But when we get that money back, which should be about over $3 million, we'll immediately reinvest that in the capital program. So.
Okay, that's awesome. All right,
Vice Chair, if I may add an addendum to that
Go ahead.
comment, or through the chair, perhaps maybe, because as I'm looking at it with 15 positions, that's got to be upwards of $1 million, right? That you're sort of dealing with. And that's just for personnel, right? So perhaps it might make sense that you take it to the subcommittee of budget and personnel, and the budget and personnel subcommittee can then perhaps provide direction or a policy suggestion to the board on how best to use those carryover funds. If we're providing direction, that way we don't get kind of caught up in the what if or where it goes or whatnot, but that the budget and personnel committee provides a recommendation to the board.
And to that, so we do a mid-year budget update, and because things change, right? And we can certainly bring it to budget personnel at that point going, okay, here's a snapshot today versus what we saw 6 months ago, and it's going to be different. Here's what we propose. What do you think?
I like it. Thank you for that. So there was this conversation around grant opportunities and how we're going to continue to be aggressive in that space, which obviously seems to be successful. And it's not directly related to the budget, but since we were talking about it, I just wanted to use the opportunity to reinforce the message. I recall that some of the grant opportunities that exist are only available to jurisdictions and that we're not eligible to apply for them. But if there's an opportunity for the services that we're using for those to support the partner agencies in being able to capitalize on those regionally, we're bringing in those dollars that help benefit us. So wherever those opportunities lie, it would be great to dig in a little bit deeper there.
Absolutely. And that's actually the direction Mike and Rachel have. And I think we have some examples of it, like with Monterey and getting that million, whatever, with the water management district next door. We helped them with a grant that they ended up receiving. So certainly as they, Mike, Rachel, and our lobbyists come across opportunities, we think about all the jurisdictions and where we can sort of help out or partner. And, we had a meeting, was that yesterday, 2 days ago, with Water Resources Agency? Same, really? Same thing with them. We talked about there's opportunities for both of us to leverage the ag connection with the recycled water connection on some of these grant opportunities. So absolutely, it's not, it's what we bring into this community, Northern or Monterey County.
And it's not as much of, it's not only a message for M1W staff, but also all the jurisdictions that are present and part of the agency to make sure that we're reaching out and working in partnership with M1W to make sure that we help champion those projects and those ideas. Thank you for that. A couple more thoughts. Just to get to the personnel side of the conversation, particularly around the CIP projects. I mean, knowing that we're going to be looking at huge investment in CIP in a significant way in comparison to the past, particularly over the next 10 years, 20 years. I'm not sure how much effort there's been to look at the types of jobs that we're potentially contracting out for and bringing those in-house and I don't know if that necessarily creates cost savings, but to make sure that we're, keeping that talent within our workforce and providing the benefits associated with that. So just a thought there that I'm not sure how much thought has gone into the amount of work that we anticipate and thinking about the time frame that exists into an actual position or positions within the agency. So just a thought on that. And in regards to the comparables, Kimberly was making a point earlier, particularly on like the engineering positions. It was alluded to comparables to like other local agencies. And I just wonder if you could speak to our comparables, what agencies those are, because my thought is that we wouldn't be comparing ourselves to local agencies. We would probably be comparing ourselves to like agencies to our own.
And that's generally what we do. It's the 10 that were on the bottom there that are wastewater recycled water facilities, because I think Luke mentioned operators and how that's very specialized, and it is. Even engineers or maintenance people, it's different to work on a truck than it is to work on a 300 horsepower pump. Wastewater engineering is a different beast than traffic engineering or general building engineering. So the comparables are to our respective agencies. Now, Lear, I don't know if you want to speak to that on so Lear does a great job, not just with our comparables, but also keeping in touch with industry, with HR industry and what other entities are doing. So probably the same, your HR people are in a lot of these discussions and associations. And it is a little different. Is that a fair statement?
As far as some of the technical positions that we have, obviously in admin positions, pretty much the same, accounting, those are pretty much the same, but electrical instrumentation, not many cities have those. Usually those are our special districts that have those type of positions, or the county of Santa Cruz has some similar positions. They too are struggling to fill some of their technical ones. As far as some of the associations, HR related, we do talk about this kind of stuff. We are all having similar issues with not being able to hire engineers, be it a traffic engineer or a wastewater engineer. So we do kind of keep our thumb on some of these things. We look internationally. It's for some positions, specifically like our SCADA positions. We have put that out there internationally just to see what we can get, and still struggling to fill that position.
And I love the focus on this part of the conversation because as we mentioned, we're going to be in negotiations in 8 months, less than that. And I think this context is helpful as what board direction we are going to get when we go to the table and the comparable study and how that weaves into everything.
And point of clarification through the chair, just with
Sure.
the comment, I had said local jurisdictions as a potential add to that. I certainly, you want to absolutely always compare apples to apples, but you also want to sort of determine where you're losing people to and figure out why. But also what's realistic for living and working in Monterey County. And I think it's important to maintain, kind of a baseline. What are other people making? What are other GMs making in the area? What are other admin assistants making? And that's helpful when you're doing comparatives with, say, the city of Monterey and the city of Salinas, or the transportation agency of Monterey County and the, Salinas Valley Solid Waste Authority, just making sure that you're having a well-rounded view of what it costs to live here and work here and what the salaries are comparatively, along with comparing other water agencies.
And we actually do look at local agencies specifically for a mechanic. I mean, I know some of the cities have mechanic positions. Looking at Todd, they have operators. Pebble Beach, they have mechanics that are similar. Santa Cruz, they have wastewater. So we do look locally as well as with our comparable agencies. It's just the comparable agencies are based off the MOU, but it is nice to just see kind of why people aren't coming here, what's stopping people, and usually it's cost of living.
Well,
And
there's,
COD has 2 of our employees, so
Yeah.
is it just, it's
And
just 2.
COD has 2 and Pebble Beach.
Oh,
has
Pebble
2,
Beach
so,
took 2. You guys have 1. You guys took 1.
Well,
Well,
there's-
pointing fingers here.
Actually.
Actually was.
Yeah, you are.
so there's a lesson here for all of us. Those of us who have friends and family who have or are considering kids, you darn well better tell them to do well in math and go into STEM fields. The jobs will be there.
No bias.
So,
Yeah, no bias.
so one last thought and maybe / question. What I hear is concern in regards to the retention of personnel. And so it might be helpful to have a little refresher on what our retention policy is, or our retention program, particularly for these positions that we're really struggling to retain folks, and making sure that we can provide the right structure for that, so that we don't lose folks and as much as we can.
So a lot of it does go around training. That is something that when you, like I mentioned, hire, say, an operator intern, they're not going to be your grade 3 operators. So you have to invest in that employee to get them up to that grade 3. That includes training them to, get their operator certification grade 1, 2, and 3. We send them to classes for that. I know we have a network analyst. We couldn't fill SCADA, so we shifted to more of the network focus, and he's actually taking classes to learn about SCADA, and because he has that interest. So just finding that interest that the employees have and trying to invest in them with that particular training. We look at our, obviously, salary and benefits is something that this year is definitely going to come up during negotiations. We try and have our social group to try and have that, that in-house camaraderie, teamwork, team building. So we do try and do just some of the kind of more minor things, though, fortunately, all of it costs money.
But it all adds up
But it
for
adds up.
retention.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
if I may, we did an employee survey just to go to the retention piece. And this was a year ago, year plus ago,
June,
year
July.
ago. And what came back was people wanted more communication and they wanted more training, like those opportunities to lead or learn to lead. So, that frankly has gone on to Lyra's shoulder to put together programs, and we've been doing that where it'll be for, supervisors and leads have training. Others, the emerging leaders that have an interest, we provide them training. Certainly during COVID, it was hard to do town hall meetings. And so we've been trying to do those quarterly, where I'll go out to the plant. We try to get everyone there to try to enhance just that one-on-one community or one-on 100 communication, but just that sort of interaction. So, yeah. Well, generally we don't have pitchforks at ours though, so. So we're trying to look at those things as well, because it's that holistic approach. It's not just salaries. It's not just a nice desk chair. It's everything.
And we do ask employees that are leaving to do an exit interview just to find out. It's like, what did you like about working here? What would you do differently? What things would you change? Just to kind of get their, their thoughts on it and see if we can implement some of these things that they've recommended.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Chair Williamson. So the bad news is I have comments on 8 slides. The good news is 7 of those 8 slide comments are really just about clarity of communicating the idea on the slide. It's not about changing the content per se. So unless directors demand that I go through those 7 during this meeting, I will simply provide them offline to Paul. Any objection to that? Okay. Let me go to the one slide issue, which is I'm paying attention to Director Craig. She wants quick meetings, so we're going to try and get there. But slide 9, and this is kind of in conjunction with some information that I believe was on slide was it 7? I don't remember which. Oh no, on slide 5. So we show in the upper right hand the little donut slide that says Pure Water Monterey is going to produce revenues of 25.6, and I presume that's roughly what the costs are.
Yeah, so
There needs to be a connection.
Yeah, there's 2 parts to that revenue. Part of it is just obviously the fees that we're getting from the sale of the water, but a lot of it actually has to do with we have to kind of treat it a revenue for loan purposes, for basically loan reimbursements,
Sure.
for this expansion part.
So the other is revenue of 8.2 million for CSIP and recycled water.
Right.
But if the public, informationally, if the public puts slide 5 and slide 9 together, they're going to say, oh, wait a minute, it's 25 million for 4,200 acre feet per year of pure water, and it's only 8.2 million for 11,000 acre feet of CSIP water. And they're going to say, why the heck that difference in cost? And obviously some of it is advanced treated pure water is more expensive to create, but I'm not sure how we want to, number one, how we want to clearly express that and perhaps explain it.
Actually, that's a great question, because just roughly that means the advanced treated is $5,900 an acre foot, and the recycled agricultural water is about $800 an acre foot, which neither are actually reflective of what the numbers are.
Yeah, I think what we could do, and we can update this for the June 5th meeting, basically, I'll split out that pure water 25 million into kind of 2 parts. Basically the amount from the water sales in essence. So just to kind of give a board an idea, it's about for next year, I think it's going to be about $3,750 an acre foot for pure water. So, and I'll break out the part from basically the loan proceeds, because that'll show it as a much smaller slice. But to Paul's point, it definitely is a lot more expensive because we're doing a lot more treatment, on pure water versus just for reclamation. It's just like a basic level of treatment for agriculture.
And Pure Water Monterey, we have a fair amount of control over the pricing of that via the water purchase agreement with Cal-Am. All right. So I'm not saying we can charge whatever the hell we want, but if inflation affects our costs, we can pass that cost on, and they've got to figure out how to cover it. The agreement for CSIP was done so many years ago. I'm not even clear whether we're able to keep up with inflation in those costs, and I'm not even remotely suggesting we look to find some way to make agriculture more expensive, because I do like inexpensive lettuce. But is there some way of somewhere, not necessarily on this slide, but some way of indicating how we keep up with the inflation of actual costs for operating CSIP?
Okay, so in a slide that may be difficult, we can certainly try to put some narrative
Or possibly in the budget,
itself.
right?
To try to respond to your question, the amended and restated water recycling agreement does have provisions that our budget, which would be reflective of any increased costs, chemicals, power, I mean, those are the big ones, are in the budget, which we work in conjunction with the Water Resources Agency. They put it into there, but in fact, they have to have it before we do our budget, and then it's approved. So there is a mechanism for those sort of increases over time. Now, it's a little different beast because the $100 million loan on pure water requires a rehab and replacement fund. So we need to fund that because the state nowadays is going, we don't want you to get to the end of the term of the loan and have something you haven't invested in. The loans back on SVRP didn't have that. So it is a little different beast. Now, having said that, we're 25 years into the project. So we do have capital projects that are built in. It's just not as structured as the pure water side, but we can put a brief narrative on those two in the budget doc.
Yeah, Paul, and I think what we can reemphasize too is we try to say this, I think, in 2 places in the budget. Our agreement with the Water Resources Agency is basically we get 100% reimbursement for all of our costs that we have 3 different operations: CSIP, SVRP, and SRDF. And that also includes, as Paul mentioned, for any capital improvements that we do for them, and also the debt service. So,
but however, let's be clear on that. We get potentially 100% reimbursement of our costs for running the tertiary treatment stage at the plant. Would that tertiary treatment stage work if water didn't come through the force main to the plant? Probably not. And for a variety of historical reasons, the costs of transmitting raw water to get it to CSIP is borne exclusively by our ratepayers. It's not rolled into the rates that the ag industry pays per se.
And the same is true for pure water.
Right.
The
Same is
primary and
true for
secondary
pure
costs
water.
of treatment are borne by all of our ratepayers and not passed on.
Right. And I'm not sure that the users of Pure Water Monterey or the users of CSIP water necessarily know that, or just that from an information perspective, that could be characterized as some form of subsidy to their operations.
Right, but if we didn't have either one of those programs, they'd still have to pay and it would go out to the
That's
ocean.
the rationale exactly for
Right.
why it was set up this way.
Right.
That, and it is what it is, but I
Right.
just want a little clarity on ensuring we keep up with the actual cost of that CSIP stage, the tertiary treatment stage. With respect, let's see, to employees, I've probably said this once or twice to the board, but maybe we should consider going a little bit beyond interns to a co-op situation. If we could set one up with CSUMB or even with Northeastern, which has the largest co-op program of any university in the United States, but there's dozens and dozens of universities that now offer co-op programs, and we might be able to find specific, for instance, STEM or project management or whatever fields of study where we can get, and does everyone know how co-op programs work? So Northeastern invented this back in the late 1890s. You get a bachelor's degree from Northeastern. It takes 5 years, but at the end of those 5 years, you have 2 years of full-time work under your belt, interspersed in 3-month and 6-month chunks. The university keeps the billet filled with a person, with a student co-op, 12 months out of the year. All right, so you'll see a different face switching off either after 3 months or 6 months. Engineering students at Northeastern who go through the co-op program, at least when I graduated from Northeastern, were pulling down starting salaries with a bachelor's degree in electrical, mechanical, civil engineering equal to graduates of MIT. And that was because they had, in most cases, 2 years of work experience in that particular company that they'd worked for. And the company had been able to look at that person really, really, if you will, intimately and say, yeah, we want to keep this person or we don't want to keep this person. So this is a very symbiotic relationship. It does put a little burden on HR. And it potentially puts a little burden on some of our rank and file employees to help train as they go along. But, you know, a co-op who's now been with you for 9 months or is in their, you know, year and a half worth of time with you, probably ought to be able to do a job fairly well. So anyway, just an idea, not in this budget, but an idea related to trying to get at the STEM issue. I couldn't find on the expense side in the budget anything budgeted on our assistance program. Did I just miss that? Is that on a page somewhere?
It's kind of basically incorporated in there. What we're doing is we've increased that amount for next year, at least preliminarily, to reflect the increase in the rates, basically. So the rates are going up, what 15% for next year. So the amount of the assistance is going up at least that amount. We'll be coming back to the board at a later date to kind of talk a little bit more about the assistance program, potential different options that we can look at, including, for example, funding maybe instead of like 2 months of the year, maybe 4 or 6 months of the year. We're kind of having some internal discussions. We actually had a discussion earlier this week with United Way, just to kind of hear their thoughts. We'll be talking with BB&K a little bit more as well too. But yes, that is included as part of the budget for next year. Absolutely.
But from an information perspective, it seems like for our customers, letting them know quite clearly that that's there, it exists, and we're putting money against it. Maybe it should be called out separately somehow, somewhere.
Yeah, I can definitely. Yeah, we can look to put something in the transmittal letter. What we also try to do, just so the board knows, we kind of do 2 things. We have it prominently on the top part of our website. And most months when we're sending out the bills, it's just another reminder for our customers that they do have the program that they can apply for it. We've talked a little bit with United Way too. They have like a 311 program, and we're going to be working with them. That may be another avenue that can advertise it even a little bit more. So,
and then related to that, as we all know, we cannot fund that with any ratepayer money. So should there be on the revenue side a line that shows how we're funding that or how much we're funding it?
What I think we can do is, yeah, we'll add a little clarification about the program in there, and then we'll talk specifically about the, like you said, in essence, the non-fee revenues that can be used to fund it. So,
and
It
I'll
was identified on slide 13, the financial assistance as one of our highlighted goals to provide for eligible low-income customers. It didn't give a number, but it did highlight that as in our budget.
right. And that was one of the slides I had comments on for clarification, but we'll get to that offline. Last comment, I do absolutely support the additional, in particular, engineering positions, if for no other reason than looking back on Marina Coast taking on the ORD community, and then Fora putting a reuse plan together that then leads to a lot of projects on the ORD community, Sea Haven, the Dunes, Seaside Highlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. looking back on how we handled it, I'm not sure that we, Marina Coast, had enough engineering personnel to do a really, really bang up job. Not that, not that I know of anything really bad having happened as a consequence of perhaps been a little bit less well-staffed than we should have. So I definitely support that, particularly given the number of significant dollar amount projects we have going forward. And some are in areas that we clearly have relatively recent experience in, but I'm not so sure if we end up in renewable energy with more solar. We have some experience with that, but it's how many years old now?
We're at about 9 years right now, 10 years. The solar field, right? It was right before I got here.
And I don't know about you, but when I think back on what I was teaching 10 years ago, I'm not sure I could remember how to teach it now without a lot of review, since I hadn't taught it for 10 years, certain topics. Anyway, any reclamas, any last minute comments? Staff, do you think you have enough direction?
I think so. I think we've captured the comments and it's actually distributed to respond accordingly. And as I mentioned, this will come back to the June 5th board meeting for approval. So some of what you said will certainly be reflected in it. I will not be here at that board meeting, so hopefully it's nice and, obviously it'll be nice and smooth. I won't be here, so.
You said it.
Okay, we haven't gone out to the public. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this draft budget?
Don't see any raised hands from the public, Chair Moore.
It's mostly staff.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to staff reports. Any staff reports?
None.
No staff reports.
Oh. So we went over.
Yeah. Okay, all right.
Oh, hold it. Someone just stood up.
Oh, no.
There we have it.
When's the performance of?
Main issue of municipal water leader, May 2023 issue. There is a highlighted piece from Paul Shudo of Monterey One Water, leading reuse on California Central Coast. So if anybody wants to pick that up and do some live reading, we have that available.
Why don't you just email a copy of the article to us?
We actually have a whole stack of the actual magazines that the editor gave us.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, you
It's a
gave-
different feel.
Oh, okay. You'll get one.
Okay, very good.
Autographs present.
Yeah.
All
Yeah. Don't say I never gave you anything.
right, we'll move on to agenda item 8, board member comments. Director Askew, anything remotely? All right, thank you for joining us remotely. Any other directors in the room? Board member comments? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Fred, for you and your staff for hard work on this.
Thanks,
All
all,
et cetera.
all of our staff.
And we stand adjourned.